After all these years, desktop PCs are still at the forefront of the gaming experience, delivering raw performance and functionality unparalleled by other devices. At the core of each PC is a processor, or CPU, that carries out billions of instructions per second to make everything tick. For a computer part with such an important job that lives in millions of people's homes, it's surprising that only 2 companies in the world manufacture desktop CPUs. Those companies are Intel and AMD, and they've been waging war for ages. For the last decade or so, Intel has dominated the CPU market, with their competitor bringing little to the table. Over the years, a lack of competition slowed the growth of the PC gaming industry, with Intel rolling out increasingly lackluster products while keeping their best tech hidden, perhaps awaiting the day when AMD would rise again and disrupt the market, bringing innovation back into the hands of consumers. That day came in March of 2017 when AMD launched their family of first-generation Ryzen processors. A flexible platform, strong budget offerings, and the ability to tear through varied workloads with more cores made the chips an appealing option, filling in the gaps of their rivals' product stack. This marked an exciting turning point for the industry, but many folks were still disappointed by Ryzen's gaming performance, where Intel remained supreme. 1 year later, AMD launched their 2nd-gen Ryzen series based on the same DNA as its predecessor. This improved gaming performance slightly, further increasing the value proposition of Ryzen, but Intel's core processors were still the top choice for gamers chasing maximum performance. That brings us to today, with AMD launching their 3rd-generation Ryzen 3000 series CPUs, built from the ground up on a whole new 7nm architecture that aims to take the most lethal shot at Intel in over a decade. It's a moment in computing history that we've anticipated for so long, and today we find out if it was worth the wait.
Dang the road, you finally shut up! What a stupid intro! Are you talking out of your butthole? Cause your face ricka ass! Get to the point, show the benchmark! My nipples are tingling with anticipation.
Are you done? The Ryzen 3000
I'll be
lineup
done when you grow some balls, you ugly boy!
This video is brought to you by the Corsair Hydro X series. Experience best-in-class performance and beautiful aesthetics with a brand new family of custom water cooling hardware. Quality construction, perfect fitment, and next-level engineering come together to give enthusiasts a cool, quiet, and breathtaking solution for the rig of your dreams. Click on the link below to learn more. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. I had to kick Lyle out of the room. He was just way too much for me right now. Sorry about that. But he does kind of have a point. There's bound to be plenty of in-depth, well-made videos on Ryzen 3000 surfacing today, so why make this one of them? I'm just gonna cut to the chase with some quick testing setup before diving into a large suite of benchmarks that cover gaming, streaming, and editing. Then we'll talk about the results afterwards. So holding to that, AMD kicked off their Ryzen 3000 series with 5 new processors that launched today. The company also confirmed last month that their super high-end 16-core Ryzen 9 3950X will be launching in September later this year. For now, we have 2 mid-range Ryzen 5 SKUs, 2 high-end Ryzen 7 SKUs, and the first ever Ryzen 9 part to hit the market. I've spent the last 3 days or so testing the Ryzen 7 3700X, Ryzen 9 3900X, and their competitors, so that's what we'll be focused on today. Pricing is typically what determines which CPUs from opposite corners of the octagon get pitted head-to-head, and in this case, the 3700X goes up against the Intel Core i7 9700K, which is roughly 10% more expensive at the time of filming. While both chips sport 8 cores, the 3700X has twice the number of threads at its disposal, as the 9700K lacks hyperthreading support. However, it does ship with higher clock speeds out of the box. AMD scores the lower TDP here, although it's well known by now that Intel's advertised TDP is based on base clock alone and should be taken with a grain of salt anyway. The Intel part lacks any stock cooler, while the 3700X includes a Wraith Prism RGB unit, which is a nice value add for its launch price of $329 compared to the 9700K at $365. If you have about $500 to spend on a CPU, you might be considering the Ryzen 9 3900X or the Core i9 9900K, which is currently 2% cheaper. The 3900X sports 12 cores and 24 threads, crushing the Core i9's 8 and 16 configuration, albeit with slower base and boost clock frequencies. Understandably, we see a higher TDP on the 3900X than its smaller Ryzen 7 brethren, which again is hard to compare to Intel's marketing spec. Like the 3700X, the Ryzen 9 also ships with a Wraith Prism RGB cooler and launches at $499 versus $489 for the 9900K. Here's a quick look at the test systems. For AMD, we're using an MSI X570 Ace motherboard and 16 gigs of DDR4 3600 memory overclocked with little effort to 3733. From my brief amount of tinkering, memory compatibility with Ryzen 3000 is already chalking up to be 100 times better and more stable than with previous generations. For CPU cooler, we're using the Asus ROG Ryujin 360mm AIO using the default fan curve, and we'll be booting off of a 2TB Aorus PCIe Gen 4 NVMe SSD. An exciting first, as the X570 platform marks the arrival of PCIe Gen 4 support. Our GPU is NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 2080 Founders Edition running stock. While using an RTX 2080 Ti would have shown more disparity in gaming performance between CPUs, I opted for a more realistic approach in a world where few gamers have over $1,000 to spend on a video card. There's also bound to be no shortage of Ryzen 3000 reviews using RTX 2080 Ti's if you're looking for them. Intel CPUs were tested on the Gigabyte Aorus Z390 Extreme with 16 gigs of DDR4 at 3400, bearing in mind that Intel CPUs don't benefit from high memory frequency in most applications like Ryzen chips do. The system uses the same cooler, GPU, and power supply as the AMD testbed, but boots off a WD Black SN750 PCIe Gen 3 SSD. Windows 10 Pro on build 1903 and GeForce Wickle Driver 430.86 were running on both systems. With that out of the way, let's talk benchmarks. A couple polls confirmed that the vast majority of you would use the new high-end Ryzen chips for gaming and content creation, like streaming and editing, and that you'd be mostly gaming at 1920 by 1080 and 2560 by 1440, so those are the workloads and resolutions I've tested in today. None of the CPUs were manually overclocked, however multi-core enhancement was enabled on both systems' motherboards. Multi-core enhancement, or MCE, applies a factory overclock of sorts that can potentially make the chips operate out of spec. The MCE setting is enabled by default on both of these boards, so the results you're about to see most closely reflect the performance of a bone-stock plug-and-play experience with the given hardware. Ambient temperature was 22 degrees Celsius or 72 Fahrenheit. So right out of the gate, we see the Ryzen family topping the charts in Firestrike Extreme, even if it is by a small margin. The 3900X brings home the highest overall score, followed by the 3700X, with the Intel parts trailing behind. The best graphics score, however, goes to the 9700K. The 9900K practically ties the 3900X's graphics score and its own Bloodlines main score, adding to the somewhat inconclusiveness of this test in particular. Once again, the 3900X takes the top overall score in Time Spy, this time followed by the 9900K, then the 3700X, with the 9700K in dead last by quite a bit. The 3900X also leads with the graphics score, while the remaining SKUs duke it out and land just a few points apart. Our first full title tested is Ashes of the Singularity at 1080p, and here we see Intel pull ahead by a whopping 13% in average frame rates, and even more so with 1% lows. As expected, the gaps close a bit at 1440p as we become more GPU bound, but Intel retains its lead, especially the 9900K with a 7% uplift over its competitors. Battlefield 5 at 1080p shows similar results, but the difference isn't quite as extreme here, and AMD seems to be holding fast. Ryzen 3000's promised IPC improvement appears to be at work here, keeping the path clear for the monstrous RTX 2080. Echoing the results at 1440p, the Intel chips take a modest lead, approaching the highly sought-after 144 FPS mark. Doom was the only game I did not test at 1080p, due to both systems maxing out its 200 frame rate cap at said resolution. But at 1440p, we see all four contenders neck and neck in average frame rates, although something kind of funky is afoot with our 1% lows. The 9900K was technically the best and worst performing chip in this regard, but sometimes benchmarks are just funny that way. Since I feel bad for taking away that 1080p slide, I threw in Doom at 4K to make things right. This is the only 4K gaming test today though, so don't get used to it. Again, very comparable results here, which is a given for this resolution, with our GPU handling much of the legwork. GTA 5 is a very CPU-intensive game, so it's great for this kind of testing. The 9900K takes a 9% lead over the 3900X in average frame rates, while the 9700K enjoys a hefty 15% bump over the 3700X. GTA 5 does a great job at leveraging multiple threads, but having 16 of them is probably overkill, and ultimately it's Intel's wicked IPC that has this round in the bag. The 9900K nets 6% more frames than its rival at 1440p, while the 9700K continues thrashing the 3700X, this time by 10%. We see a brief role reversal in the Resident Evil 2 remake, with the 3900X delivering 3% more frames on average, and the 3700X having some revenge on the Core i7 by about 5%. Oddly enough, Intel steals back the crown at 1440p, as if only to let AMD taste victory for a single fleeting moment. Now, the Shadow of the Tomb Raider built-in benchmark kept reporting a minimum frame rate of 0 FPS for all CPUs, so this isn't the best slide by any means. You might say it's rather average. Still, we can see the 9900K and 9700K are 6% and 9% faster than their direct competitors, respectively. With high resolutions being the great FPS equalizer for CPUs, we see a stalemate begin to form at 1440p. At this point, we can switch gears to professional workloads. I tried my best to keep my workstation tests as realistic and practical as possible in order to give you an idea of how the hardware might perform in real-world situations. For my streaming benchmark, I ran GTA 5 on the streamer system at 1440p based on the poll results you guys gave earlier. The game was streamed out to Twitch at 1080p 60 frames per second with a 5000 kilobit per second bitrate as per the platform's recommendation for that resolution and frame rate. Lucky for all 4 of our contenders, OBS reported 0 dropped frames for all, and our hypothetical viewers on the receiving end enjoyed equally smooth playback of similar quality across the board. As you might expect, the results are more varied on the host side, with the Intel chips delivering 13% more frames on average to the streamer. Cinebench is an exciting test because it's the first time we get to see the 3900X spread its wings. This is what it was built for and what it does best. With a multi-threaded score that's 42% higher than the 9900K and 88% higher than the 9700K, the 3900X is a computing monstrosity, partly thanks to its higher thread count. The Ryzen 7 part is no slouch either. The 9900K barely beats the significantly cheaper 3700X by just 4%, and the 3700X crushes the 9700K by 27%. Single-threaded scores are grouped much closer together, with the 9900K leading by about 1.6% over its direct competitor, and the 9700K which sees a 2.5% bump over the 3700X. Handbrake is a great rendering benchmark because it leverages all threads typically at 100% utilization. Here the 3900X renders a 10-minute 4K clip 11% faster than the 9900K and 9% faster than the 9700K, which surprisingly bests its hyper-threaded ally. The 3700X takes about 8% longer to finish than the Ryzen 9 part, but renders up to 4% faster than both Intel CPUs. It's not a huge lead, but still impressive given its lower price. Our first encoding test in Premiere Pro Creative Cloud renders a 10-minute 4K timeline of footage that includes color correction effects and video transitions to help tax the system. This time the 9900K barely edges out the 3700X and renders much faster than the 9700K, but trails behind the 3900X, which does the job nearly 7% faster. I also ran a second rendering test in Premiere just to see how things hold up with gameplay footage overlaid with the shrunken piece of video where a streamer might be displayed. Twitch streamers often cut together highlight reels of their streams for their YouTube channels, so this seemed like a handy test to include. The 10-minute clip was rendered at 1080p 60 frames per second, which is pretty standard for this type of content. Here we see the same ranking play out as the last slide, although here the 3900X is just 2% faster than the 9900K, while being 11.6% faster than the 9700K. It's also about 7% faster than the 3700X, which is just 5.3% slower than the 9900K. When it comes to rendering, the 3900X is the definitive breadwinner, whereas the 9700K seems to be the weakest link of the bunch. The 9900K and 3700X seem to trade blows in this category, which is an accomplishment for the significantly cheaper Ryzen 7 part. Now, I made this next multicam test with serious editors in mind. The objective is to play back 3 4K clips simultaneously at various playback speeds and record the number of dropped frames after 1 to 3 minutes depending on the speed. I've worked on dozens of multicam projects in my day, and there's nothing worse than trying to scrub through several clips at once only to have them chug into a choppy mess. At 1x real-time speed, our 9700K is the only SKU that drops frames, 163 in fact, which causes the playback to stutter consistently. At 2x, all CPUs drop frames like they're hot, but the 9700K does so poorly, the playback is too fragmented to edit comfortably. While the 3900X drops the least amount of frames at 2x and higher, the 3700X and 9900K are so close behind that perceptible playback smoothness between these 3 CPUs is indistinguishable. Even 8x playback looks beautiful on each of these high-end processors, except the 9700K. It's worth pointing out that the 9900K and the 3700X are rubbing up against each other again, and should probably get a room at this point. Now, in my testing today, I did not find a task demanding enough to show the full benefits of X570's PCIe Gen 4 standard, but it is something editors should factor into their buying decision and do more research on if they plan on needing super fast NVMe storage for things like 8K editing and other extreme workflows. For the average prosumer making YouTube videos or low-budget productions, existing PCIe Gen 3 NVMe drives are still insanely fast. Now that we've covered all the data, which CPU should you buy? As usual, it boils down to your budget and what kind of workloads you plan on running. Let's first address gamers who aren't concerned with doing any other intensive tasks besides gaming. Looking back at Ryzen 7 2700 and 2700X gaming benchmarks, the new Ryzen series has roughly cut the performance gap between Intel in half, a significant jump over last gen that puts Ryzen 3000 hot on the heels of Big Blue. Having said that, it's evident that Intel is still the gaming champ and still the choice for enthusiasts looking to max out their frame rates, especially users with extremely high-end video cards like the RTX 2080 Ti, as the higher IPC will help these GPUs reach their full potential. If this applies to you and the only intensive task you're doing with your system is gaming, I would strongly recommend the 9700K over the 9900K due to its significantly lower price and the fact that there's virtually no difference in gaming performance between the two. Like the 9900K, the 3900X is a bad value if gaming is your only agenda because it's more expensive and performs worse in games than the 9700K. Compared to the 3700X, the 9700K is up to 15% faster, possibly more in certain titles not tested here, but the 3700X is still a viable gaming-only chip if you're trying to stretch your budget since it's a bit cheaper than the Core i7 and it includes a cooler. Combined, that saves you roughly $60 that you can pocket or put towards a faster graphics card, for example. It has to be said that, like all Ryzen 3000 SKUs, the 3700X also benefits from a scalable AM4 platform that's backward and forward compatible with existing and future Ryzen CPUs as long as AMD continues making good on their promises. This simplifies and lessens the cost of upgrading processors down the line and is worth considering in your buying decision. The AM4 platform also supports PCIe Gen 4, although currently it's a feature that's less beneficial to gamers than it is to content creators, and therefore should not be given as much weight for an exclusive gaming machine. From a gamer's perspective, the 3700X delivers a better overall value than the 9700K, with its lower price, flexible platform, and bonus ads. On the same token, the 9700K offers the better gaming experience and will allow current and next-gen top-tier GPUs to deliver more frames to the screen. Moving on to users who plan to game and stream with their PCs. Our 1080p 60fps test proves that all the CPUs provided an equally smooth stream with 0 dropped frames. The deciding factor then comes down to gaming performance on the streamer side, which clearly favors our Intel SKUs. If you're like most streamers targeting 1080p 60fps, the 9700K is technically the strongest option right now, since it delivered higher frame rates than both Ryzen chips, and it's much cheaper than the 9900K and 3900X. That being said, it technically has the worst multi-threaded performance here, meaning it's probably less equipped to handle streaming for the long haul than any of these CPUs. It's difficult to say what the streaming landscape will look like 1 or 2 years from now and beyond, so while the 9700K's multi-threaded performance is adequate for most streamers today, it'll likely begin showing its age in the face of higher streaming demands before the 9900K and its competitors. As mentioned, the 9900K won't improve your frame rate much, but its higher thread count makes it a smarter choice for serious streamers than the 9700K. The 3900X one-ups the 9900K in multi-threaded performance, which should give it a longer lifespan as a streaming CPU, but falls behind in gaming. So you'll want to choose one of these chips based on which workload you prioritize. 9900K for gaming, 3900X for streaming. Like the 9700K, the 3700X is a viable budget option for streamers, but for different reasons. It trades in some gaming performance for higher multi-threaded performance, which might not be needed now, but it does make the part more future-ready for streaming. If you have less than $400 to spend on a streaming CPU, you'll have to decide if you want higher frame rates today or better streaming tomorrow. Now, if we add video editing and rendering to the picture for a fully fledged content creation workflow, the multi-threaded performance of the 3900X makes it the clear winner, with faster render times and fewer dropped frames than the 9900K. It also has support for PCIe Gen 4 should that be required, and the option to easily upgrade to the 16-core Ryzen 9 3950X down the line. However, the 3900X should last most users a very long time, as it's a beast of a chip and the best damn value of any dodeca-core CPU ever. The 3700X's editing prowess is comparable to the 9900K, but it's nearly $200 cheaper and can also leverage PCIe Gen 4, making it a much better value for this use case. The 9700K should be avoided here due to its slower render times and inability to handle more intensive editing workflows. Finally, if you could care less about gaming and editing is your sole objective, only the Ryzen chips should be considered, as they perform better than their direct competitors for roughly the same price or cheaper. Of course, serious buyers should also consider high-end desktop platforms like Skylake X and Threadripper 2, but if those are too pricey or overkill for your needs, choosing between the 3700X and 3900X is a decision best left up to your wallet, as both parts offer great price to performance. So there you have it. At the end of the day, each of these processors fulfills different needs for different users. It'd be easy if we had one chip to rule them all, but we already kind of had that when Intel was on top and unchallenged by AMD for so many years before Ryzen came along, and that wasn't fun. Ryzen 3000 improves upon the platform's existing pillars of strength, further leveling the playing field to a degree we haven't felt in a very long time. For now, it seems strong competition in the CPU market is here to stay. But let me know what you guys think of these Ryzen CPUs and which SKU from Team Red or Blue you'll be dropping into your system. Apart from that, guys, feel free to toss a like before you go, and feel free to consider becoming a member of the channel for $5 a month, where you'll get custom badges, emojis, and other pointless things that are just so fun for some reason. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more tech stuff on the way. Thanks again for watching, have a good one, and I'll see y'all in the next video.